Skeptics often claim that the accounts of Jesus in the New Testament are completely fictitious, and that the real Jesus, if he existed, would be nothing like the Jesus of the Gospels. Well, there's a good deal of evidence, of course, which shows that the Gospels really are reliable. And in this video, I'm going to look at just one line of reasoning, a slightly unusual one, which shows not only that Jesus existed as a real living person, but also that the New Testament provides a good description of his life and of his teaching. So if you want to subscribe and hit the notify button, off we go. The point is that many skeptics say that the accounts of Jesus in the New Testament were nothing to do with what actually happened. They were invented later on by Christians. There's a response to that, which is that no ancient writer would have invented anything at all like the Jesus of the Gospels. That the Jesus they would have invented would have been totally different. How do we know that? Well, we know that because we can read the kind of things that the people who opposed Christianity, who weren't Christians, said about Jesus. From that, we can see the kind of person that they thought Jesus or a hero or the Messiah should be like. So let's think about the timing for this. There's a chart there. It goes from the birth of Jesus thereabouts to 300 AD, and we're going to put in that various events. The resurrection of Jesus took place somewhere around 30 AD, and the Gospels are written somewhere between 50 AD and probably 66 AD. Certainly they're complete before 70 AD. So somewhere in that bit we've got the Gospel descriptions of Jesus. We're going to look a little bit later than that. We're going to look at Philostratus's writings about Apollonius of Tyana. We're going to look at Celsus, who opposed Christianity. We're going to look at Lucian of Samosata, who wrote a satire which involves Christians. And finally, we're going to look at what the Jewish people were saying about it from another document from the 2nd century, about 150 AD, which is a dialogue with Trypho by Justin Martyr. And the Greek philosophers propose alternatives to Jesus. They say Jesus would have been better if. The Jewish one, they say, well, Jesus doesn't fit the picture of the Messiah because. Let's look at them individually. So we start off looking at Philostratus. Philostratus wrote a life of a philosopher by the name of Apollonius of Tyana. He wrote it in about 220 AD, and he was commissioned to do this by Roman Empress Julia Domna, mother of Caracalla, and she wanted him to do this because she wanted a really good alternative to Jesus. Too many people were being Christians, in her opinion, and she wanted to show them that there was a better alternative to Jesus, and that the person she chose as a better alternative was a man called Apollonius of Tyana. He lived 1st century. He was a Pythagorean philosopher. He probably died just before 100 AD. So Philostratus is writing a life of Apollonius about 120 years, maybe a little more than that, after Apollonius died. So a lot longer than the gap between the Gospels and the resurrection. And in fact, there are all sorts of problems with it as an accurate document in terms of things like geographical mistakes and mistakes of descriptions of places and so on. Apollonius, well, he is Pythagorean. He is a very, very wise and accomplished philosopher, and he travels around the world, and on the way around the world he acquires more wisdom, and he sees all sorts of things and just generally travels around. He gets as far as India, he goes down to Ethiopia, he goes to India via Persia, He goes to Ethiopia via Egypt. He travels to Rome. He travels through Greece. So he's not only a great traveler, but as he goes, he meets important people and the great thinkers of those areas. In Greece, he disputes with various Pythagorean philosophers from whom he learns. When he goes to Egypt, he debates with the Egyptian sages. In fact, he goes to Ethiopia, there are more sages there, and he debates with them. In Persia, he debates with the Magoi, the Magi, and in India, he talks to the Brahmins, and every time he shows that he is wiser than they are, but he also learns from them. And that makes him this great wise man, and he performs great deeds because of this wisdom. Wisdom allows him to develop ideas that he wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and hence to save people and generally improve the lot of the people he's with. So he does things like he stops wars by counsel, or he prevents epidemics, again, by knowing the right herbs to stop the diseases and how to treat them. But what he's doing is not done by the power of God. What he does is he does hugely great deeds. He's a hero. He travels great distances. He's a traveling hero. He has status. He's a philosopher that other philosophers think is wonderfully wise. He debates with the greatest, and he usually wins the debates where there's a difference in ideas. He doesn't work by God's power. He works by wisdom, but he manages to do things that are of great moment in the world. He doesn't just heal a few people. He stops an epidemic. He doesn't just make people behave better. He stops wars. He is an amazing power in the world. And that is what the pagans of the day, Julia Domna and her entourage, wanted people to take over instead of Jesus, because they thought that was more attractive than Jesus. This, by the way, is possibly a statue of Apollonius. Not clear that it is. It could be somebody else, but it's thought that that's probably Apollonius of Tyana. And here's the what they're looking for. This is what we want in this great hero. He's got to have high status. He's born to an aristocratic family, so that it's acceptable everywhere. What he does has great political significance. He is wise, and his wisdom allows him to do tremendous things. And in the end, he's recognized by important people. Admittedly, one of them is the Emperor Domitian, who has him put to death, possibly, although generally it's thought that he escaped from that and died naturally later on. And this account of Apollonius is intended to show him as better than Jesus. But he is the archetypical Greek philosophical hero. This is, if Greek was making it up, this is how they would make a story of a great person that they'd made up. He wouldn't be like Jesus. He'd be like Apollonius. Another example, Celsus. He's writing a little bit earlier than Philostratus. He's a 2nd century philosopher, and he's writing to try and rubbish Christianity. And he writes a book which is called The True Word, Logos Aletheis. And unfortunately, we haven't got it, written to provide a philosophical answer to Christianity. We haven't got it, but what we do have is a book written by the Christian writer Origen, who writes somewhat later, about 240, thereabouts, and he writes a criticism of what Celsus put in his book, and he does it by writing out the paragraph from Celsus and then putting a commentary after that showing why Celsus is wrong. So we've got a fair amount, possibly all, of Celsus's work, along with a commentary on it by Origen. It may be in the wrong order. Origen may not have written it out in the order that Celsus did, and there may be other bits of Origen didn't comment on, but we've got a fair chunk. We know what Celsus is saying about Christianity. And Celsus says you can't really believe in Jesus because he doesn't do the right things. He says Jesus, well, he's born in an obscure part of the empire to a family of just artisans and nothing particular. You can't expect such a person to achieve anything. He should be an aristocrat, says Celsus. The disciples, they were of low status as well. They have no account. They ought to be noble philosophers, but in fact they're fishermen and the peasants and even tax collectors, for goodness sake. And Celsus doesn't approve of that. He should have an entourage of noble philosophers who hang on his word and learn his philosophy. Instead, you've got a load of low-status people who don't really understand what they're being told. The miracles of Jesus, Celsus disapproves of those. They're just healings, he said. A few poor people get healed. If you go to a market in Egypt, there'll be lots of people there promising to sell you cures of almost anything. Jesus, all right, might be a bit more effective, but it's the same sort of idea. Nothing politically significant in what Jesus does, he says. He doesn't overturn empires. He doesn't stop great epidemics. He just heals a few poor people. One of the points that Celsus is really interested in is that Jesus was betrayed by one of his disciples. And he says that the disciples should have been afraid of Jesus. He should have been a fearsome character, should have had such authority and be so scary that no one would dare to betray him. But Judas did. Jesus suffered. Well, he says the Son of a God should overcome suffering as a matter of course. He shouldn't suffer at all. But if someone does threaten him with suffering, he should just simply overcome it. And finally, Jesus died and was raised from the dead. And Celsus says, gods don't die. Demigods don't die. What happens is he should have been an immortal and should have just walked away. Or maybe he should have had an apotheosis. He should have been raised to heaven to go in the sky with the gods. That would have been the kind of hero you should have had. Not Jesus who actually suffers, actually dies, and is then raised from the dead before going to heaven. That's just not the way that a hero should be. The third of the Greek ones is Lucian of Samosata, a satirist, and he mentions Christianity almost in passing. He's not really writing about Christianity. What he's writing about is a philosopher called Peregrinus, who had died at this point, and Lucian doesn't like him, and he's trying to do down Peregrinus's reputation. But one of the things Peregrinus does is he spent some time with Christians who, Lucian says, treated him as God. He said that they considered Peregrinus to be a god. It shows that Lucian isn't actually that familiar with Christianity, really. But he does make an important point, which is that he considers Christians to be fairly uneducated lot and philosophically completely naive. And that he says, they're following Jesus. Jesus was philosophically naive. What you should have had would have been a great philosopher who would found a school of philosophy, who would have known what was going on. And he portrays Christians as not being like that. So we've got some Greek arguments against Christianity. They don't like Jesus because he's a tradesman, carpenter. He's an associate of lower class people. He's not in a king's court. He doesn't do all the things that a really important person should do. He's betrayed by one of his disciples. He's nothing at all like any of the Greek heroes. That's not what you would expect him to be like. They say he should have been highborn, but he wasn't. He should have been a noted philosopher, but he wasn't. He should have been a political figure, but he wasn't. He should have been recognized by rulers. He should have been invited everywhere. He should have traveled the world and talked to philosophers. Didn't do any of that. So no Greek invented Jesus, because if they had invented Jesus, they would have invented a different Jesus. Now, looked at the case against a Greek invention. Have I made a significant point here? Let's know what you think in the comments. Let's think now about Jewish objections. There's the time scale again. And what we've got here is a dialogue with Trypho by a chap called Justin Martyr, a Christian writer. It's a bit debatable whether this is a record of a real dialogue. If you read it, it's more like a monologue against Trypho rather than a dialogue. Trypho occasionally gets a word in edgeways, but Justin just walks really all over him. And Justin is making points to overcome what Trypho was, the Jew, what was saying. And just occasionally Trypho just pops in with another point. What you've got is Justin's answer to Jewish objections to Christianity, were voiced by Trypho, but you can see what those objections are. And essentially, the objections are that Jesus is supposed to be the Messiah, but he didn't become the ruler of Israel. The Messiah is the promised king to come, and you'd expect the Messiah to take over and become the ruler of Israel and be accepted by the Jews as their ruler. But Jesus didn't, in fact, do that. He didn't become the ruler of Israel. So Trypho is expecting that Messiah will be a mighty ruler, and Jesus doesn't fit that. And the second point is that Jesus died on the cross, and Trypho says, well, Messiah wouldn't be that vulnerable. He wouldn't die. Messiah is going to rule the world forever. How can he die if he's doing that? And Trypho doesn't realize that there are two comings of Jesus. One way he dies and is raised, goes to heaven, and then comes back later on. And Trypho sort of summarizes that by saying that Jesus didn't fulfill the prophecy of the Old Testament, and Justin tries to show that he did, although Justin's arguments are very weird from a modern point of view. So Trypho has got this idea of a Messiah who will come, who will become king in Jerusalem, and will then spread his rule to cover the whole world. He'll defeat the Romans, he'll defeat the Persians, he'll defeat everybody, and he will rule the world according to the law of God. And one day Jesus will return, and he will rule the world. So it's not completely wrong. But he hasn't got this idea that there's a first coming where Jesus dies on the cross and is raised from the dead. Could that be invented? Could a picture of the Messiah as already having come be invented by a Jew? Well, I suspect not, because then you'd have to say, why isn't he ruling the world? The picture that we've got so far of how the Greeks would treat Jesus and how that the Jews would think about the accounts of Jesus is summarized for us quite nicely by Paul in his first letter to Corinth, written about 55 AD, so that's 25 years after the resurrection. And here's what he writes. He says, we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness, folly to Gentiles. So think about the Jewish writings. We know that Paul is telling us what Jews thought of Jesus because we got the evidence of Justin Martyr talking about Trypho the Jew. And certainly they wouldn't have a picture of Jesus like the one in the New Testament, or should I say a picture of the Messiah like that in the New Testament. And we also saw how the Gentiles thought that Jesus is dying on the cross, but also some other bits of Jesus's career were complete foolishness. If they were inventing a hero figure, someone who was going to found a religion, they wouldn't have invented someone like Jesus. And it's this thing about Jesus being crucified that really sticks. Neither the Greeks nor the Jews like this idea that we have a crucified and raised Messiah who is going to be the leader of a religion. And of course, Paul, back to that point, he says that's true now. His statement matches these non-biblical writings. So, Jesus wasn't invented by Jews. See that? Gospels and the New Testament is nothing like the picture of Jesus that you would get had they been invented by Jewish writers. And similarly, the picture of Jesus in the New Testament is nothing at all like the picture that a Gentile writer would have invented. So, Jesus wasn't invented by Jews, and he wasn't invented by Gentiles. There's no one left. Everyone is either a Jew or a Gentile. There's no one to invent Jesus. Now, some people say, hang on, what about Christians? Did Christians invent Jesus? Well, there's a problem there as well, because Christianity follows Jesus. If Jesus was invented by Christians, where do the Christians come from? How can they be followers of someone who doesn't exist? And it's a general problem. How would a crucified leader? Everyone agrees Jesus was crucified. Every scholar who studied it, it's one of the most obvious, possibly absolute things about Jesus that we know is that he was crucified. How would a crucified leader found a worldwide following unless he rose from the dead? Remember, this being crucified, it's a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. Neither Jews nor Gentiles of the day are going to follow a Jesus who was crucified unless he rose from the dead. And they were very much disposed to believe he didn't. They didn't want to believe in the resurrection. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul has to give a long argument about the resurrection of the dead. In verse 12, he tells how many of the people who have become Christians still can't believe in the resurrection. And in Acts 17, we find Paul in Athens, and he is talking about Jesus, and he mentions that he was raised from the dead, and immediately the people who've been listening to him to that point laugh at him and kick him out, basically, and not listen to a man who talked about foolishness like that. Jesus wasn't invented by Jews, and he wasn't invented by Gentiles. He certainly wasn't invented by Jews. If you read the gospel, what the Gospels say about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the people who were the important people in Israel at the time, you can see they're definitely not Jewish documents. No Jewish authority, the figure, is going to invent those sayings that we find in the Gospels. So, conclusion. The ancient world invented Jesus, he would have been completely different from the Gospels or the New Testament in general. You wouldn't have had a Jesus like the one we get in the New Testament. The Gentiles would have invented someone like Apollonius of Tyana, great traveller, noble birth, great philosopher. The Jewish expectation of Messiah would simply fall over because there wasn't a ruler who conquered the world who was the Jewish king in Jerusalem. So they could have invented it either. Jesus wasn't invented. That means he's real. And it's up to us to take account of that, to do something about it, because if Jesus is real, then he's a very important person indeed. So, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did like it, then please press the like button. You can subscribe to the channel. You can look out for other videos, plenty of other videos on this channel about Jesus, about Bible, about the basic teachings of the gospel. So have a look out for those. We've got a website you can look at. And don't forget to subscribe, and may God bless you always.